This is the Realty Classroom Podcast, episode number 136. It's all about three questions: what, how, and who. Are you a real estate agent with an entrepreneurial spirit who wants to turn your job into a business without sacrificing your lifestyle, but you just can't seem to find the right plan or, any plan to help you get there? You're definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Realty Classroom and the host of this podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action to get started in a better direction, I've created a free strategic course for you that's waiting at freeagentgift.com, freeagentgift.com. If you do nothing else, get over there and download the infographic because it very much relates, especially to today's subject about what has to happen in a real estate business. All right. It's all about three questions: what, how, who. All right. The first point here: you must become a student of how business really works. And I'm not saying real estate alone. I'm saying if you decide that you want to do anything that terms you as an entrepreneur or an independent contractor, like in real estate, then you must become a student of that business. And that's the pandemic in our industry, is that so many of you real estate agents begin as if it's a job. I'm not saying you consciously say this isn't a business, this is a job. But those concepts alone, just studying those simple concepts alone, is a wonderful starting point. A job, let's just think about it even from a technical standpoint. You become the employee of a corporation, and you know that you're an employee when you're getting a paycheck and they're taking your taxes out. That's a pretty good hint that you just became an employee of that company. And so a lot of what happens is controlled by the corporation, and they have the ability to tell you what to do, when to do it, and all that good stuff, right? By the way, that didn't work out too well for me. That's why I knew I was an independent thinking person who was more likely to be an independent contractor or an entrepreneur. It didn't hit me very quickly, but that's why I got into real estate, was that freedom to create. Now, I wasn't naive, and I had corporate experience, especially in the venture capital business, where we were looking at all of these true entrepreneurially driven companies. I mean, they were being started. I was talking to founders of companies on a regular basis, and I knew they were my kindred spirit, but I also understood that the ones that did what they were doing the best were real students of what was happening. And I'm not saying they were academics. I'm not saying these are all guys and gals that graduated from top schools and they had the greatest grade point average. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I think you probably might be more likely to find those folks in a corporate structure than you would somebody who's truly an entrepreneur, just nailing it academically, because independents are very creative and we require our creative freedom. I'm not saying that the two don't cross over, but you get the point. Okay, let's move on. So the idea is, this is not a job like an employee has. This is an independent contractor opportunity where nobody's coming for you, and you have to figure out all of this by yourself. And again, I get it that you might have gone to a brokerage in hopes that they had some of this figured out. Well, if brokerages had it so well figured out, then a lot more independent contractor real estate agents would be doing a lot better. So I'm not knocking, I own a brokerage, so I'm not knocking us as brokers. I'm just saying, come on, everybody wake up and become a student. How does the business work in reality? Because really, every time we start to talk about brokerages and agents, we're looking inward to the business. What I'm saying is look outward. When I'm saying become a student of the business, look at how the housing business really works. How does a seller go through the process? How does a buyer go through the process? And if you want to get up above ourselves, how does an agent go through the process? And especially one that really evolves all the way from just getting a license to actually owning an independent brokerage that's proliferating and growing. That to me is really the continuum. I'm not saying that's you or that has to be you, but on that continuum of growth into a true business that doesn't require that person to be an agent per se anymore, that's worth studying. And really, it's almost a requirement if you don't want to struggle as an independent contractor in the real estate agent business. So that's the first point. Become a student of how this business really works. The next point, though, is here we go into this what, how, and who. This is a process that I've discovered. Isn't it great that I can share it with you in only 3 words with a question mark after them and very short words too? The idea is the first real what to do. You need to recognize that when you're learning, you must document what to do. So in other words, let's go back to the first point. Let's pretend that you and I are riding along on Einstein's beam of light, looking down upon our own theories and what's happening and practicality, and we see these buyers and sellers going through the process. We should proverbially, he said, be sitting there looking down and taking notes. Okay? Well, there's what to do. You meet the seller at their home and you introduce yourself and you go for a tour of the home, and then you sit down at a dining room table where you're looking eye to eye and it's a real business discussion. Then you go over your plan. Then you go over the math. Then you see if there's anything else that you haven't undone. Then you figure out what your follow-up is. See, that's kind of what's happening in reality. Same thing with a buyer. Well, I can see from above the buyer coming to an open house, and I see that the agent's not even there to greet them. Or they are there to greet them. There's a good one. This person runs a great open house. See, that's what to do. And when I say, how do you know if an agent's doing a great job? Well, you see that the buyers and sellers are coming to that person. That means there's an attraction on what to do, right? So there's a big laundry list of what to do for sellers, for buyers, and then as an agent, if you're recruiting and you're onboarding and training, what to do. So you make these big long lists, and it's easy. You pick up I was going to grab one here because I have them everywhere, a legal pad, and I like the pencils. I do have my pencil here, my trusty pencil with an eraser, a mechanical. I like those, right? No sharpeners, so that I'm always ready to document what to do. Just as an observer, as if I were being brought into an industry as a consultant. By the way, having learned so much about this process, you could really take me to anything, a sport, another business, and this is what I would do. I'd say, okay, I need my education first. Let's presume, I know a little bit about the mortgage business because I'm around it all the time, but I certainly wouldn't sit here with hubris and tell you I know the ins and outs. So I would get up above it and I would say, well, what to do if you're going to be a mortgage broker? And I'd sit there the same way I would with real estate. Or when I'm watching my kids, one's a photographer, one's really technically an internet marketer as an employee for a big company. I sit above it and I say, well, what to do? And how do we know what to do, right? So we're observing and documenting. And again, I know those words start to slip together. You heard me actually slip and say how a couple of times. Well, what to do is more of a conglomeration of several different viewpoints. In other words, I see company A, company B, company C, and I try to get generally what's happening in a business. So if I were to come into this business again, I would have been a student of some of the bigger brokerages, some of the smaller brokerages, and definitely those that seem to grow the fastest. I would have taken a sampling of, say, 3 of them, and I would have just studied what's happening in each one of them. And are there differences that I can reconcile? Because that gets to the next level here, and that's the third point to this podcast. As you begin to really do the work, in other words, now I'm sitting here watching what to do, making a list, but I have to go out and do it. I have to go make a living. So now it's, how do I do it? Do I copy one of those that I liked better? Do I come up with my own way of doing things, but still generally I'm there? By the way, you don't want to get weirdly creative in the beginning. Copying what to do from other people is how it works. Now, as you're doing that work, though, what you're learning personally from personal experience, this is where people say to agents, okay, well, you've got to go get some experience. Why? Because you're learning more particularly how you should do it. So you had this framework of what to do. By the way, when I talk about freeagentgift.com, this little easy to remember URL that I put up there, what I put up there was really, if you want to see what I did to document and chunk it up, I turned everything I knew about how, or what to do in a business, and I put it on an infographic. Thanks to Michael Gerber's work, this is where a lot of this started in my head. So I made that. And then clearly, that was a good framework of what to do in any small business, let alone real estate agency. But then I kind of made it about real estate. And then as I did these things, I started to ask myself, well, how? And this is really a fascinating process of learning how, because most of us rush right down, as he says in his book too, to the technical work. So if I were running around with a buyer, I was learning how to do it better than others, right? So in that competitive vein. In other words, when I would run an open house, I would watch the methodology. Okay, I really should sit up here like a maitre d' at the front door, and I should have a sign-in sheet, and I should exchange a feature sheet. Then I should have additional information for them. That was a real particular how to run an open house most efficiently. And why? Because the consumer was reacting to me more positively, and I could focus on the more serious people if I just held myself at some command spot in the house instead of running around after each person. So that's an example of how you would do it. Then when I would go into listing presentations, I was taught originally this long diatribe of a presentation. And by the way, this was pre-internet, so there was a reason for a longer presentation back then. But then as time went on, I realized, well, the consumer doesn't like this. See, that's the key on how to learn how your best practices are. They're falling asleep, and I think they're saying yes to list with me because they're just surrendering, literally. So I started to shorten it. I started to bullet point it, and I could see the reaction from the consumer was a higher level of, they could understand this simple approach. They appreciated it, and they were empowering me by giving me the listing in return and exchange. So that was how I was learning to do it the best possible way, which, by the way, continues to this very day. Even when you're podcasting or something like that, you're always learning how to do something. But especially if you go back to the first point of the podcast, I'm a consummate student. I was just listening to Tony Hsieh's book, God rest his soul, he just passed, but he was an incredible entrepreneur and mostly well known for his work at Zappos. And you're always learning these little tiny distinctions. As you become expert at something, it's not more complicated. In fact, it's less, strangely. Right? As you converge on things, they become more straightforward. So the how becomes actually simpler. And people say, well, anybody could copy you then. Well, God bless them, knock themselves out. But I haven't seen anybody really kill themselves to copy anything that I do, including I've given it to some friends who are competitors, some of the simple stuff I have. And I try to give it away every week on this podcast. It's like nobody wants to do any work, it turns out, right? So I'll keep continuing in my world learning how to do it the best possible way. And that's the work of our mastermind. We just keep beating on this process on how we do it because we've evolved. I mean, we know what to do for the most part, unless something collides into the business and changes it. So we've got this what to do going on, and we just every week pound on how, and document. We have debates and arguments, and we sweat on Thursdays when we really do the hard work, right? So it's interesting. And then the fourth point here is really where I'm at today. And I'll go back to that word empowerment. My fourth point I wrote down here was, as you grow your business, you must learn who should do the work other than you. Now, that's going to sound, I don't know, maybe too big of a concept if you're a newer agent or brand new listening to this. A lot of you that are top producers that have been trying to figure out who, you always start with who. That's the problem. And that's why I said these three questions are actually in order. If I could have it all back again, or I were to start anew, or I'm, teaching my kids, 5 of which I have, I would teach them this process. Jenny, what do you do to become a successful actress? Jack, what do you do to become a successful investment banker? Marty, what do you do to become a successful hockey player? Stephanie, what do you do to become a successful in her case, really internet marketer now, working for a big corporation? And lastly, Chrissy, what do you do to become a successful photographer? So you can see all the differences, but it's the same starting point. What? And then you start to learn the how. And that's why you go to school. If you can go to a school smartly for the thing that you really are trying to learn how to do, now everything becomes easier. But over time, if you want to turn it into a business, which is what this whole podcast is about, you really need to start to learn you're going to be working with a lot of other who's. But the big mistake that most people make when they're turning it into a business early on, and there's a lot of big brokerages. See, this is where I say you got to be careful of the advice you get from a brokerage that hasn't had this process either, even though they're prolifically successful and they have all of these agents. I get it. It doesn't make them the best trainers and then coaches because they don't take the time to do it. I'll give you an example. If you're in a brokerage that says to you, just go hire an assistant, hit somebody over the head. Don't do it. Don't hit somebody over the head. But have a conversation with them. Say, stop saying that to me. Because it really is the kiss of death for the growth of a business. Here's why. When you learn what to do and then how to do it, and you're documenting this, there are a lot of details. And by the way, even if you're an agent that's only done one deal, there were a lot of details in that one sell side, that one buy side. So what to do, how to do, and then you did it all type of thing has been documented. So how are you going to do a whole bunch of deals if you're not going to ask other people for help? So when people say an assistant doing what? An assistant with your marketing module? And inside of marketing, what part of marketing? Are you talking about social marketing? And then once you get to social, you're talking about posting content constantly with calls to action? Or are you talking about running ads? And and both of those skill sets are a little bit different. So now when you go to look for the who and you go to Upwork, you're very specific. You don't say, need a real estate assistant, and then all the generalists show up. And now all you've done is give yourself the burden of trying to what? Like sift and sort everything for them? Or are you going to just end up doing what most top producers do? Dump on them. And they become a catch-all and they burn out and you wonder why. See, nobody's teaching you process here. So let me go back over these bullet points here, okay? It's all about three questions. What, how, who. I'm going to make a case in that order is the best process I can leave you with. The first point I made here was you must become a student in general of a business and how it's working, okay? That's not the how I'm talking about yet, but just get up above the business and become a student of it. Let's leave it at that. The next point was when you are learning, you must document what to do. So when you're observing for the very first time and studying this business in general, just document what to do. I need to do some marketing. I need to convert people. I need to close those people. I need to follow up with them as past clients. That's sort of the what in big chunks, right? The next point was as you begin to do the work, learn how to do it the best way possible. How do I do marketing the best way possible with content and ads combined and then syndicating them? How do I move people from a lead status to a prospect status to a client status? You get the point. That's all the how. You have to document that in detail because when it works, you don't want to forget. Oh, I used to do that. I hear that all the time because you haven't documented how you did it. So every time now you're going back and repeating that process and refining it. And the last point was the key here for all you top producers especially or those struggling to get everything done. And you don't even, when I say top producer, don't forget, that means anybody above the average in growing. I mean, there's only 3 to 4 deals a year that people are doing. And so if you're doing like 10, 12, you need some help. But before you get the who, you got to figure out all this stuff that's happening, stick to the stuff you're the best at that brings the revenue and hire people that are super efficient and effective for just a couple hours a week to take the burden off, not some general assistant who becomes the catch-all dump all. All right, let me summarize it this way. The key when building a real estate business is that you must learn what to do and put that in a certain A through Z order. Then, as you do the work, learn how to do it best and memorialize all that stuff into systems. However, ultimately, it's most important to figure out who should do the work of those systems other than you if you really want to start to build a business. All right, now remember, I'm going to say this again, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction with a copy of our free strategic plan that really tells you how the business works. So there's your first cheat sheet for point number 1, and that's sitting there waiting for you at freeagentgift.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We also broadcast our live sales training calls on Facebook and YouTube every Friday. If you want to see some of the how we do it, we give it away to you. And remember, you just turn on those page and channel notifications for Friday and you'll be ready to go. So look for the Realty Classroom and you won't miss the reminders. We'd also appreciate it if you would comment on our post so we can know what you're thinking and you can get the help that you need, not the help that we just keep pontificating here because I don't know what you're thinking. So I have to do my best to try to guess. All right. So communicate with me. Hey, thanks for listening. But remember what I always sign off on. Nobody is coming for you. So go get to work on your own business, and I will see you in the next episode to try to help you. Thanks for listening.